Euranet Plus Press Club. Lifting lockdown is going on all over Europe. How is this happening, and how patient or rebellious were EU citizens who had to submit rather drastic rules for about 2 months? That's what we will discuss today. I'm happy to welcome Beatrice Rios from Euractiv, Olivier Henrion from the Belgian RTBF, and Hugues Libietis from Latvia's radio. Hello and welcome to everybody.
Hello.
Hello.
So lockdown was yesterday, back to freedom. That's the feeling you get when you walk these days through at least parts of Brussels. Beatrice, how was it working as a journalist? You live in Brussels, and how was it working as a journalist in the Brussels bubble under the lockdown?
It was a little bit strange because for everyone that has been working as a correspondent in Brussels, they should know that we have a lot of meetings, that we attend a lot of briefings, we hang out together with other journalists, we meet for a coffee with a source. So it was rather strange to just be home and having to have all those kind of conferences either through the phone or through Zoom and other apps. So yeah, it felt kind of strange not having all that busy weeks with the briefings and press conferences and so on, and just being home the whole day.
Yeah, I saw a tweet of you when the last EU summit took place, when you were tweeting that you miss your colleagues, and the summit was obviously also had turned into a video conference.
I do miss all my colleagues, and that's part of the reporting as well, right?
Like in Belgium, families had also to deal with parenting, working, schooling at home. However, there was one thing that was special. You told me beforehand, students were able to follow classes live on TV. Now, did that help, and how did the people react?
Yeah, well, this was kind of at first experiment to continue studying, especially in schools, because the school year is coming to the end, and then the school kids just need to study. So at first it was kind of a digital version, and so teachers had to rearrange their daily schedules and homeworks and to do everything on a distance, and it was quite a big challenge to make sure that all the school children, regarding of the age, have the laptops or computers at home to follow all these things. And there are also some subjects which are officially shot on TV. There is a channel or two channels that air those programs, and you can actually follow like a lesson on TV. And I have heard that there are lots of people who are, for example, Latvians living abroad. They are making their children to watch those schools, so they can actually follow the subjects in Latvian, and they say that it's really a great opportunity. And I've also heard that Estonians, we are always competing who is the best one, so they say that they are quite jealous to us that we have it and they don't.
So Latvia 1 point, I'd say. Will anything change for you now, next week? How is the lifting of the lockdown going in Latvia?
Yeah, just recently, I think yesterday, there was a government meeting about what to do, and starting from May 12th, there will be some lifting of some restrictions, and gatherings for up to 25 people will be allowed. And the first cultural institutions to gradually reopen will be museums, libraries, private culture sites, and cinemas, and also concert halls. And because there have been a lot of discussions about the losses that especially the cultural life is experiencing right now, and I think that people are just missing all this cultural life, and even more than pubs probably. But well, yeah, and I think that now there is this discussion that probably those restrictions should be lifted at all, but probably something that it's still so shaky that probably these tactics to do it step by step is much better.
So I think you're better off than we are in Belgium, and definitely better off than people are in Spain. Beatrice, you are from Spain originally, and I'm sure you have been in touch with many people during the lockdown. In Spain, people now were able to get out after weeks of, let's say, staying at home. That must have been a big relief. Will the lifting actually be the same all over Spain, such as was the lockdown?
No, it won't be. So first of all, yeah, it's important to highlight that Spain had one of the strongest, the hardest lockdown measures in Europe, and only absolutely necessary trips away from home were allowed. There was a big control. There were a lot of controls in the roads to avoid movement within cities, but also in the cities for people that were moving around. I personally am quite proud of how people in Spain have respected the measures. I also understand that it has to do a lot with the situation in the country. It has been one of the most hit countries by the pandemic in Europe. So it makes sense that people were genuinely scared and they were taking very seriously the advice from the government. Now, indeed, they have started lifting the measures of the lockdown. One of the first things they did last week was allowing for people to go for walks. They have structured even the walks for those people depending on the age. And so early in the morning, you can go to do some sports. Then during the day is more for elderly and for kids. And then later in the day, you can also go for a walk. It was a huge relief for people because they'd been at home for 2 months. For some people who were at risks group, they have not left their home at all. So indeed, it was something very important for them. Now we see that the government has taken into consideration the fact that if you look at the map in Spain, you have places that are not registering new cases anymore, whereas you see how the situation in Madrid is still quite serious. So they are trying to assess how the situation is in different provinces, and then depending on that, they continue with the phase out of the lockdown measures. So we know that some of those cities are going to pass to the second phase, where we're going to have some shops opening, even terrace. They're going to allow for gathering up to 10 people. So there's going to be a relax of those measures. However, in places that are still heavily affected, they're going to have to keep on what they are right now, which is this possibility of people going out for walks, but definitely not opening yet any of the shops or the bars.
Now, all these measures have been conducted from Madrid. The strict rules were effective for everybody, but figures show that some regions weren't very much affected by the virus. They didn't register many cases. So how come these people did accept those strict rules, and have there been any protests?
There has been a lot of complaints, especially from the islands, because they registered the first cases at the beginning of the pandemic, but after all, they controlled the situation pretty much, and there was not many problems. However, there was an understanding that the situation was so serious that you can not just let it go just because you're not registering case. Now that when we are seeing that that situation is being under control in the whole country, then you're gonna start moving forward. But it's also true that the problem in Spain, it's very much also about the conception of the state and how some regions have certain powers and how the government, in order to have all the control of the situation, had to impose the state of emergency to be able to have competencies in all the different areas. So in a way, it was also a political thing. It was not so much people complaining about it, although it's not only about regions. I was recently reading a lot about, because we have many rural areas that are quite isolated and depopulated, and there were some people saying that it seems absurd that in places where there were not many cases and some people were actually living out of their own garden, that they were not able to go there to collect the food, right? So yeah, somehow I think it's just part of the whole not really being sure on how to deal with this situation, because we've all been taken somehow by surprise and not being so sure what is right and what is wrong. And I think people have been very understandable in that way and being very open to just accept the measures and make the best out of it, just because they understand how serious the situation is.
And the figures were actually high in Spain, as we know. Now, Ugis, what about the reactions of Latvian citizens? Did they criticize the lockdown a lot, or did they just agree with what the government proposed?
Just recently, yesterday, there was a poll about the attitude of people, how they evaluate all those lockdown measures. So, and approximately 70% say that these measures were adequate, and 15% saying that they were too soft, actually. And so the remaining approximately 10 only percent say that they were very or too strict, and that is very funny. And that there's one other statistics which is even more funny, how people themselves perceive if they have followed all the rules or restrictions. And the data show that actually um, around 79% of people think that they have been following all the restrictions. But if you are asked if, for example, Olivier has followed the restrictions, or Beatrice, then there's a huge split at approximately 44% say that no, they were doing something wrong. So there is some kind of, I don't know, informing feeling that everybody else is doing something wrong, but I am the perfect one. There have been a lot of people who have used this time to just go out and I don't know, be in nature. That is one thing that was also advised by some doctors. You can go out, but just try to distance and try not to gather in one place. But it was there was also some kind of overreaction. And if it was a good weather, there was some, I don't know, some nature park or something, it was filled with cars. There were hundreds of people, and they just needed to close it or put some restrictions again, because people just want to get out. And I absolutely understand Beatrice when she's saying that people just in Spain can't get out from the house. I would just be, I don't know, mad staying in four walls with my kid and my wife. But well, here we had this kind of, I would say, freedom of movement in certain ways. So each day I was able to go like riding a bicycle with my son, etc. And I think that at one point the weather also helped us. And if the weather is bad, people just don't want to go out, and that is like self-made isolation.
That does help indeed. So I'm sure Olivier and Beatrice followed the rule, by the way. So Olivier, you are a French citizen as well. And I'd like to ask you, we didn't hear anything about protests in France as well. So the strict rules, the people seemed to be okay with that. Now that the lifting of the lockdown is going on, we might well, let's say the government might face some political consequences of the lockdown. What's your analysis on that?
It's true that the French people don't necessarily have a reputation of being well disciplined and obey by the rule. On the contrary, we tend to see them as some conflictual people trying always to contest political decisions. And that was the case at the beginning of the lockdown. There was some voice saying that why do they impose that to us? We shouldn't get our freedom being restricted as such. But then very quickly, when they realized that it was a killing disease, the measures have been quite well followed. French people have been very well disciplined. In a way, the lockdown was a source of reassurance for them. It was a source of being well protected. Of course, there have been some exceptions in the regions or in part of France where you have social exclusion, where you leave 5, 6, 7 people in a 2-bedroom apartment. It's very difficult to live in such lockdown conditions. But studies carried out by some researchers showed actually, when they analyzed the movement of your mobile phone, they showed that French people, such as Italian or Spaniards, actually didn't really move out of their house, of their immediate surrounding. But it's true that as time goes by, the situation is changing a bit. You can see more and more people in the streets in Belgium, in France too. And it's true as well that this lockdown decision at the beginning were taken with a kind of political cohesion. And that political cohesion tends to disappear. In France, for instance, there is a strong fear that there will be quite a lot of social conflicts in the coming weeks, because even though people were very obedient, even though people were very disciplined, they have suffered. A lot of them will lose their job or have already lost their jobs. There are already huge queue in front of charity house giving food for free. So they know that there will be some political conflict and the political scene is quite ready to do that. The government at the moment is trying to raise the idea of having a political union government, but the right parties don't want that at all. They see that there will be presidential election in 2 years, and they see that it's a trap as well for them to be seen as a big bloc, because who will remain in the opposition so far? It's the Front National, the Rassemblement National, the extreme right, and they are scared that the Rassemblement National could gather all the dissatisfaction within the population. But it's also interesting to realize that when you look at the opinion polls so far, there are no political personalities who has gained from this coronavirus. Those people like Marine Le Pen or Jean-Luc Mélenchon, those people from the extreme right or the extreme left, are more or less stable. And even though they tend to gather the voice of those who feel left apart, it didn't seem to have worked so far, but we could see that there would be a change in that trend in the coming weeks.
Maybe thank you, Olivier, for that. And maybe one final question, maybe to Beatrice. There was a lot of talking how different this lockdown has been organized in all EU countries. Would it have been possible, in your view, to coordinate that in another way, to uniform that, or do you think it's just impossible? Every country had to do its own thing.
I think it's difficult, but it's not impossible. I think somehow especially the European Commission has been taken by surprise again, as many other governments, and they didn't have a plan for such a situation, which also explained why they were rather slow in taking a stand on it. Because I understand that in the end, the European Union doesn't have the competencies to do this. However, they do have the political power to gather all the governments and trying to coordinate the response to such a situation. I understand that at the beginning, all the governments were just taking care of themselves or their citizens, but we have to understand that we live in a union where there is no borders until now. Now we do have borders again, but that whatever decisions we take at national level, it does have an impact on other countries as well. We can still try to solve that in the lifting of the lockdown measures. The Commission issued communication regarding the coordination of the lifting of the measures. I am not entirely sure it's been useful, because we see that even before the release of this communication, some countries were already announcing that they were lifting some of the measures. However, I do believe that this could be useful when it comes to opening the borders. We've seen already that there has been communications between different member states to open their borders bilaterally to allow for tourists, to try to save them the summer. So I think that the European Commission should use its political weight, its political power to try to coordinate with member states and come up with an European response to what it seems not only a European but a global problem.
Well, we have seen in the discussion today that also the lifting of the lockdown is not really going the same way in all EU countries. I'm afraid we have reached the end of this press club today. Thank you, Beatrice. Thank you, Olivier. Thank you, Hugis, for joining. And thanks to all of you for watching.